Hello, it's Monday, June 5th, 2017. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO-Headline News. We can't just go blindly into this week, gentle listeners. There's been tragedy and heartbreak throughout this country and abroad. Prayers and thoughts of humanity and loving kindness go out from the bottoms of all of our hearts. Just sometime today, if you can find a second to take that beat, take a breath, and send healing thoughts to everybody. But meanwhile, here's something circumpolar stars don't rise or set. Well, talk about a midpoint for attitude. This is information from earthsky.org. We've spoken about circumpolar stars before and given them a little bit of a description, but let's flesh it out a tad, shall we? They neither rise nor set. They always remain in the sky. In fact, they're up there even in daytime when you can't see them. For instance, the stars of the famous Big Dipper asterism, they're circumpolar at all latitudes north of 41 degrees north, which includes the northern half of the mainland United States and most of Europe. Apparently, how many circumpolar stars one can see in one's own sky, that depends on where you are. At the Earth's north and south poles, every star is circumpolar. At the Earth's equator, no star is circumpolar. Places between the equator and the poles have some stars that are circumpolar and some that rise and set daily, like the sun. Here in the northern hemisphere, we're lucky to have a moderately bright star, Polaris, the North Star, nearly coinciding with the North Celestial Pole. But of course, that point in the sky that's at zenith, straight overhead at the Earth's North Pole. Draw that imaginary line now down from Polaris, the North Star, to the horizon, and presto, you have what it takes to draw out the circle of circumpolar stars in your sky. In the northern hemisphere, an imaginary vertical line from the North Celestial Pole to your horizon serves as a radius measure for the circle of circumpolar stars in your sky, and the closer you are to the Earth's North Pole, the closer the North Celestial Pole is to your zenith, your overhead point. For people in the northern hemisphere, Polaris nearly pinpoints the center of that great big circle of circumpolar stars on the sky's dome, and the imaginary vertical line from Polaris to the horizon, that depicts the radius measure. Let your arm serve as something called a circle compass. Oh, this is perfect. Don't leave home without it. It's your arm. It enables you to envision the circle of circumpolar stars with your mind's eye. Closer to the equator, the circle of circumpolar stars will grow smaller, and nearer to the North Pole or South Pole, the circle of circumpolar stars grows ever larger. The technique for locating the circle of circumpolar stars works in the southern hemisphere as well. But the folks at earthsky.org tell us that's a little bit trickier to do the star hop. That dance needs a little bit different choreography because the sky's dome at zenith over the Earth's south pole has caused practiced stargazers to rely on the Southern Cross and key stars to star hop to the South Celestial Pole. There's illustrations. You can find them later at ufo-headline-news.com. Ooh, look at the Magellanic Clouds. The Southern Cross is circumpolar anywhere south of 35 degrees south latitude. And yet, in the northern latitude, well, it's going to be that W or M-shaped constellation, depending on one's point of view, the one called Cassiopeia. That's circumpolar at all places north of 35 degrees north latitude. There will be charts. By the way, Cassiopeia lies on the opposite side of Polaris from the Big Dipper. So from mid-northern latitudes, the Big Dipper and Polaris will make it easy to locate Cassiopeia. If Cassiopeia is circumpolar in your sky, then the Southern Cross never climbs above your horizon. And conversely, if the Southern Cross is circumpolar in your sky, the constellation Cassiopeia never climbs above the horizon. And here's the bottom line. Circumpolar stars stay above the horizon all hours of the day, every day of the year. Although you can't see them, they're up there even in daytime. Like so many other things we postulate. And in case you missed it over the weekend, here's the latest update and recap on SpaceX. They launched that first recycled supply ship, yes they did, out of Cape Canaveral, Florida. Here we go from the Associated Press. SpaceX launched its first recycled cargo ship to the International Space Station on Saturday, yet another milestone in its bid to drive down flight costs. After a 2-day delay caused by thunderstorms, the unmanned Falcon rocket blasted off, carrying a Dragon capsule that made a station delivery nearly 3 years ago. When this refurbished Dragon reaches the orbiting lab on Monday, that's today, it will be the first returning craft since NASA's now retired shuttles. The first stage booster flown Saturday afternoon was brand new, as is now the custom, returned to Cape Canaveral following liftoff for a successful vertical touchdown. Quote, "The Falcon has landed," end quotes. SpaceX Mission Control declared from company headquarters in Hawthorne, California, and a cheer went up, as might be expected. The plan is to launch the booster again, instead of junking it in the ocean, as so many other rocket makers do. Just 2 months ago, SpaceX launched its first recycled booster on a satellite mission. Another flight featuring a reused booster is coming up later this month. And here at UFO Headline News on Inception Radio Network, we will keep you posted. This Dragon capsule, meanwhile, came back for Take 2, following a few modifications and much testing. Shortly before liftoff, SpaceX Vice President Hans Königsmann called the Dragon reflight, quote, "a pretty big deal," end quotes. It's all part of the company's quest, he said, to lower the cost of access to space through reusability. Quote, "Overall, a great day," end quotes, Königsmann later told reporters. And, quote, "another wonderful launch," end quotes. That's from NASA's Ven Feng, a station manager. And another thing, as expected, SpaceX chief Elon Musk tweeted early Sunday morning, quote, "It's starting to feel kinda normal to reuse rockets. Good. That's how it is for cars and airplanes, and how it should be for rockets," end quotes. So say we all. The Dragon that went soaring Saturday has the same hull and most of the same parts from its 2014 flight. SpaceX installed a new heat shield and parachutes, among a few other things, for that trip back to Earth at the end of the flight. The Dragon is the only supply ship capable of surviving re-entry. All the others burn up in the atmosphere. NASA's other supplier, Orbital ATK, will see its cargo carrier depart the 250-mile-high complex on Sunday, 6 weeks after arriving. Besides the usual supplies, SpaceX's latest 6,000-pound shipment included mice and flies, bless their hearts, for research, a new kind of roll-up solar panel, and a neutron star detector. For now, SpaceX said savings are minimal because all the inspections and tests performed on the already flown parts they added up. NASA's Space Station Program Manager Kirk Shireman told reporters earlier in the week SpaceX did a thorough job recertifying the Dragon. The risk is not substantially more than if it were a capsule straight off the factory floor. He said the entire industry is interested in this, quote, "whole notion of reuse," end quotes. That was first realized back with the space shuttles. This was the 100th launch from NASA's hallowed Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center, that departure point for the Apollo moonshots, as well as dozens of shuttle missions, including the last one in 2011. SpaceX now is leasing that pad from NASA. The company's first launch from there was back in February. Time to don that protective gear, goggles, gloves, boots perhaps, and buckle up. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Actually, we're going to a place this broadcaster has struggled to pronounce. It's the country of Greece, and the city is, let me spell it first, Nea, second word, Michaniona. We're going to go for Nea Mykonos. Nea Mykonos, Greece, and if there's anyone listening there, apologies. This has a MUFON case number. That number is 84105. The date of the sighting is the 29th of May this year, and it wasn't reported till 5/31/2017. Here's the summary from the witness. Red, very big object, disappeared. Two, quote, flame balls, end quotes, start descending, hovering over water, changing to horizontal tube-like, which emits enormous light. Well, that sounds dramatic. And what is dramatic is the sighting specifics listing of a viewing distance here, 21 to 100 feet, eventually extending to 101 feet out to 500 feet. And the altitude, it just says landed. The sighting duration, 1 hour. But the object features simply are listed as unknown. The flight path, hovering, then path. And as we heard in the summary, the object shape, fireball. There isn't any weather accompanying this sighting, but here is the sighting itself. This is raw, basically unedited in the witness's first-person words. Here we go. I was with another 3 persons at the balcony. 2 to 3 minutes after midnight, we saw a half-moon-like object with a pure red color. It was not glowing. It began to fade. When it finished fading, 2 bright objects appeared and began to descend straight to the sea. When they reached the surface, they started moving. We were happy about this, and we immediately took our car and drove to the port as soon as possible. 2 minutes later, when we arrived, the objects had changed their shape, and they were like horizontal fluorescent tubes, emitting the brightest golden light we had ever seen. They were steady at the same spot, while the worm-like shape seemed to be doing a wave movement. We moved back to the car and started driving. We were trying to reach the coastline to get a closer look. Now, while driving, the red object in the sky, it was over the clouds, was seen once again. We arrived at the closest beach, and then we were observing a headlight, which looked like it was scanning the area. It was moving. The light was moving towards the coast. We were amazed when we saw the surface of the sea. There were hundreds of red lights, white lights, blue lights, like airplanes, floating over the sea. Those 2 bright objects were not seen. There was one and a bigger one, a double-size object in the sky, moving to the coastline while blinking, perhaps going north. You could see this object emitting enormous light and then turning off. Again and again, it was turning off and then lighting up again. We lost sight of it while we drove to try to reach it. One cannot suppose that these were the same type of objects. They could change their form and size, like controlling their energy. These did not seem to be solid objects, and there were no sounds. This site is archaeological. No wind. The first hot day of summer. Well, that piques our imagination. An archaeological site? We should do some checking on the area of Nea Mycaniona in Greece. Perhaps it is some, well, we're not saying it's aliens, but let's cross lots of different bodies of water and hover over Gaithersburg, Maryland in the United States. That's where MUFON case number 84137 happened. The date was the 31st of May this year. It was reported June 2nd. In summary, red orb hovered approximately 5 feet over the road and then descended, and then rapidly accelerated up and to the right. Sighting specifics, viewing distance 101 feet to 500 feet. The altitude is unknown. It was a brief sighting duration, only 8 seconds, so most understandably, the witness reported the features as none. The object flight path was hovering, and it had a sphere shape. There's a tad of meteorology here. The maximum temperature over and in Gaithersburg, Maryland, at the time of this sighting was 81 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 degrees Celsius, dropping down to a mean temperature of 61 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees Celsius. The maximum visibility was 10 miles, 16 kilometers, then down to a minimum that isn't even listed. The conditions were foggy and thundering. So let's read what happened to our witness. Driving north on Maryland 124 at mid-morning, sky clear. We'll stop right there because that seems to contradict the above report, which says foggy and thundering. Yes, well, let's continue. No other traffic on the road. My wife and I crested a small hill and observed a red light. This red light was approximately 100 feet in front of our car. It was hovering approximately 5 feet above the road. The object stayed ahead of the car, and then it descended closer to the road and hovered there before rapidly accelerating to the right and up at about a 60-degree angle and into the sky. My wife observed the orb as having very well-defined edges. I saw red radiating rays of light emitting from the well-defined edges of a red orb. The total time of observation was approximately 8 seconds. We asked each other if we had seen the orb, and confirmed we had. I noted the time and location of the observation and looked for any possible reflections or any other possible sources for this red orb. I noted nothing unusual about the road itself or the grass and the trees that lined the sides of the road. We continued to drive in silence, not quite comprehending what we'd seen. And later we independently recorded our observations. That's always a good idea, so that's terrific. We have a very unusual sighting and a witness confirmation and an independent recording of what they saw. Let's go down the coast from Gaithersburg, Maryland, and go to Weeki Wachee, Florida. Who could resist a place with a name like that? We'll spell it. It's W-E-E-K-I, second word, W-A-C-H-E-E, Weeki Wachee. It's MUFON case number 84014. It's an older case. In fact, it goes way back to 1981, to the 31st of May. Yet again, we have another kind of an anniversary sighting, we're calling them. Something seems to trigger that desire to post a sighting around the same time of the year. Some seasonal thing, some memory, we don't know. But they submitted this sighting on the 27th of May this year. In summary, the witness reports light in sky following me, then hovering over my car. The viewing distance here was 21 to 100 feet. The altitude was 500 feet or less. The entire sighting duration, 15 minutes. Still, they're only reporting the object features as none. Well, it was a long time ago. The object flight path was hovering and then path. And this object shape was sphere. We're guessing they went back and looked up the temperature, etc., and here it goes. The maximum temperature was 99 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius, dropping down to a minimum of 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 18 degrees Celsius. No notations on the visibility factors, but it does indicate the conditions of the weather, nothing abnormal. Here's the sighting from 1981, Weeki Wachee, Florida. Coming home from work about 11 p.m., heading east from the Bayport Inn, there was a bright light in the sky. This light seemed to be following me for 5 to 6 miles. When I stopped at the stop sign at United States Highway 19, I noticed that it was getting darker, and then I realized there was no more light, but light from an object that was coming from behind me. I watched it stop a few feet in front of my car. I looked up through my windshield, and this object was dark and smooth and flat. I looked out my rear and side windows and realized it was also perfectly round. I was thinking if there was one car in front of me and one to the back, and if I drew a circle around them, well, that was the size of this object that was just hovering over my car. If I had stood on the roof of my car and stretched, I could have touched the bottom of this thing. I then saw that the dash lights in my car were slowly dimming. My headlights were doing the same thing, and then my car stalled. I heard a whoosh, and this thing took off north on US 19, and I watched it make a complete stop. Then it took off west towards the Gulf in a matter of seconds. I had such a sense of calm, even starting when the light in the sky was following me. In hindsight, I should have been scared to death when this thing was hovering over my car, but it just seemed fascinating. My old car started right up, and I went home. I think about this every day, and over the years, I've told anyone who would listen. The next morning, I reported this to the sheriff's office, and they said it was probably the military testing aircraft off the coast. This was a flying saucer that I witnessed. About a year ago, I Googled flying saucer and car stalling, and I was amazed with reports like mine. To my amazement, I came across the man John Reeves, who is an abductee. John Reeves' experiences happened a couple of miles from mine back in the 1960s. Well, there's a Google, gentle listeners, John Reeves, and that Reeves is spelled R-E-E-V-E-S. Recently, here at UFO Headline News on Inception Radio Network, we covered Melinda Leslie's extraordinary sighting that spun off out of the festivities and conferences at the Contact in the Desert conference in the Mojave Desert in Southern California, Joshua Tree, actually, and we mentioned giant rock. So here's some stuff on giant rock quickly from Wiki in case you didn't know. Giant rock is a large freestanding boulder in the Mojave Desert directly adjacent to the city of Landers, California. This boulder covers 5,800 square feet of ground, and it's 7 stories high. Giant rock is purported to be the largest freestanding boulder in the world. Native Americans of the Joshua Tree, California area consider this rock to be sacred. A single large room, which was subsequently filled in, was dug beneath the rock and resided in by a prospector named Frank Kreitzer, C-R-I-T-Z-E-R. This was during the 1930s and into the early 1940s. Frank Kreitzer perished in a self-detonated dynamite explosion in this room on the 24th of July, 1942. It seems he was being investigated by local police. In the 1950s, this rock was the gathering point for UFO believers. It's located on land, which at the time was leased by George Van Tassel, a famous name to all ufologists and those interested, a friend of Frank Kreitzer's, a purported flying saucer contactee, Wiki adds the purported, and an organizer of UFO conventions. George Van Tassel also built the nearby Integratron, another great wiki. I-N-T-E-G-R-A-T-R-O-N is the spelling. There's also a small airport in the vicinity that George Van Tassel operated from 1947 to 1975. Shortly after the turn of the 21st century, giant rock fractured, split in two, which this broadcaster believes was predicted by Native Americans of the area. The split revealed an interior of white granite. The exterior of the rock is partially covered in graffiti, sad commentary, but at any rate, that's where the area was that Melinda Leslie and her group had an extraordinary sighting. Well, there's more. We found this at ufostalker.com, same place, Landers, California, same conference, Contact in the Desert. And here's the case number. MUFON 84134 is the designation for tracking and identification purposes. The date of this sighting is May 21st, 2017, reported to MUFON on the 2nd of June this year. The summary: amber light, elongated shape, being followed by military helicopter. Sighting specifics: viewing distance 501 feet to 1 mile, altitude 500 feet or less. Sighting duration 2 minutes. Object features unknown. Object flight path, path with directional change. And this object was shaped like a cigar. The temperature at the time in Landers, California, 98 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius, dropping down to a chilly desert temperature, 66 degrees Fahrenheit, 19 degrees Celsius. The maximum visibility at the time of this event, 10 miles, 16 kilometers. The minimum, 9 miles, 14 kilometers. And at the time, there didn't seem to be anything abnormal about the meteorology. Here's the report. shortly after doing a high vibration meditation while holding hands in a circle with about 50 others at Giant Rock, California, an amber craft appeared to the northeast. My wife saw it through night vision goggles. While I just missed seeing it, I was racing over to the others, and this thing disappeared to the northwest, behind Spy Mountain. Within minutes, loud roaring of what sounded like jet engines, and a military helicopter came out of the east-northeast, followed by another a minute or so later. These then came around the south side of Spy Mountain, heading south, and clearly we could see an elongated amber light being followed by a military helicopter with flashing lights. The amber light was not flashing and had no other lights visible. The amber light sped off to the south, and the helicopter could not keep up. This was interesting. We had invited them during our meditation to appear. And the first thing that happens is our military chases them. Again, we have the perfect setting. We also see indications of an attempt at conscious contact. We're getting conscious contact right here. It's telling us we've got to fly because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Inception Radio Network. Follow today's broadcast at ufo-headline-news.com. Please take care of each other. We're all in this together. This is Carol Carl. See you tomorrow.